FSE-1. No name listed. Lieutenant Grant Mosier stopped reading and held the muster board a little higher, the way a man holds a thing he is about to turn into a performance. Ship's got a ghost, people. Somebody check the passageways for cold spots. He looked down the rider rank until he found her. Third from the left, a brunette woman in plain coveralls with no name tape and no rank tabs. And he smiled the smile of a 29-year-old officer who believes the morning belongs to him. Stand easy, Seaman Nobody. You must be a nobody. They didn't even waste ink on you. The laugh moved down the flight deck, the way weather moves across open water, front to back, no one wanting to be the still spot in it. 193 sailors stood morning muster on the aft flight deck of the amphibious assault ship Chandler Point that day, and most of them laughed because a lieutenant had told a joke and the sun was barely up and laughing was free. Seaman Tally Broussard, 20 years old and 11 months in the Navy, laughed with them. Later, she would remember that she had, and what the woman's face had been doing while she did. Nothing. The woman's face had been doing nothing at all. Present. She said it one beat early, before Mosier had finished savoring the pause, and the word landed flat and exact, like a tool set down on a bench in its painted outline. She stood at position 3 of the rider rank with her boots 8 inches apart and her eyes level with the horizon, and she did not look at the lieutenant, and she did not look at the deck, and she did not blush. The interval between her shoulder and the next sailor's shoulder was regulation to the inch. Nobody teaches riders that. Nobody teaches most sailors that. Muster aboard a United States warship is not a ceremony. It is an instrument. 6 stations, 740 lines. 1 consolidated report on the Command Master Chief's clipboard by 0650. And its single purpose is as old as ships, to count the living and notice the missing. The Navy has taken muster after fires, after collisions, after men went over the side in the dark, and the roll read aloud is the exact seam where a crew finds out what the night cost. That is the instrument Lieutenant Grant Mosier was playing for laughs at 0630 with his cover pushed back on his head. And the joke worked precisely because not one sailor on that deck, including the lieutenant, understood what the blank line was for. She understood. She stood inside the silence where a name used to be, at position 3, boots 8 inches apart, and let 193 people laugh at a headstone. Mosier marked the line and moved on, because the roll was long, and the joke had already paid. Farrell, Fuentes, Garner. The names went by in column order, 740 lines of ship's company, and embarked personnel across 6 muster stations, and only 1 line on the entire ship carried no name at all. Just a billet code, FSE-1, and the designation PAX, and a blank where a human being was supposed to be. Command Master Chief Wallace Farrow took the consolidated report at 0651, initialed it, and stood for a moment at the rail with the clipboard against his chest. 50 years old, 31 of them in the Navy, and he had learned a long time ago that a ship tells you things in small print. He had watched the rider rank while the deck laughed. He had watched a woman not need the laugh to end. He looked at the blank line on the sheet, and then he looked down the deck to where she was already gone. And he had not seen her go, which was its own small piece of information, because Wallace Farrow saw everyone go. Below decks, the ship took up its day. The Chandler Point was 4 days out of port with 2,100 souls aboard, embarked Marines included, working up toward a theater exercise whose operational annex most of the crew would never be cleared to read. In the admin office on the second deck, a petty officer fed the morning's muster corrections into the system 1 line at a time, and the system accepted every one of them without comment, the way systems do. And in a different year, in a different ocean, a printer in a shore operations center hummed and fed a single sheet of paper into its tray. The sheet was a rider manifest. It listed names. The printer did not know what a name was worth, and neither, that afternoon, did the yeoman who picked the page up, squared it against the desk twice, and walked it down a hallway toward a fax machine that should never have been part of anything. The page settled. A hand took it. Somewhere far away and 10 years forward, a flight deck was still laughing. The woman in the plain coveralls carried her sea bag down 2 ladder wells to rider berthing without touching the rails with more than 2 fingers, and her boots made almost no sound on the steel, which is a thing that takes either 20 years of ships or a very unusual first week. Her rack was the bottom of 3, inboard, under a ventilation duct that dripped exactly every 11 seconds. She stowed her gear in 4 minutes, made the rack tight enough to bounce a washer, and sat down with a green pocket notebook and a pencil sharpened to a working point. She wrote the date. She wrote, Muster, 0630, flight deck. She did not write anything about a lieutenant or a laugh or a name. Then she squared the notebook against her knee, capped the whole morning inside it, and went to find out where the ship needed hands, because the fastest way to disappear aboard a warship is to be useful. And Josephine Calder had been disappearing, professionally and completely, for 10 years. The ship did not know that name. The ship was not allowed to. The hangar bay of an amphibious assault ship is 2 acres of steel weather, and on the second morning, it was staged for a vertical replenishment, the exercise schedule valued at 11 pallet loads. The rigging crew had the 4th pallet slung and ready when the woman from the rider rank stopped beside it, looked once at the sling legs and said, "Re-rig that." The petty officer in charge of the detail turned around with the expression sailors reserve for riders who speak. He was 26 and had done 91 vertrep evolutions and did not need help from a woman whose coverall said nothing at all. "It's rigged fine. Legs twisted, chokers back-loaded." She stepped in, moved 2 hands once, and the sling geometry changed the way a sentence changes when you fix the grammar. 4-leg bridle, 60-degree angle. That load cell reads 5,200 pounds. Your rated capacity just dropped 1/3 with that twist in it. Step 6 of the rigging checklist. Read it again. He read it again. Step 6 said what she said it said. The load cell, when the chief made them rehang and test it, read 5,240 pounds, and the twisted leg would have carried the concentration on the upswing over open deck, with 19 people inside the ark. The chief looked at the woman for a long moment and asked, reasonably, who she was. "Riders," she said, which was 1 word and not an answer, and she walked back to the trash detail she had been assigned, because the idle rider list existed, and her code was on it. Pharaoh heard about it by lunch, the way command master chiefs hear about everything, sideways and twice. He found the detail chief and had him walk the correction through, step by step, and then he asked the question that mattered. What was she doing while you tested it? "Standing by, Master Chief, perfectly still. Checked her watch once." "Which wrist?" The chief blinked. "Left. Face was turned in now that you say it. Wore it like inside." Pharaoh nodded and wrote nothing down. Operators wear the face in so it doesn't flash light at night. Admin errors don't. In the other year, in the other ocean, a briefing room with no windows held 11 people and a coffee mess that had given up. Chief Special Warfare Operator Silas Quaid, 36 years old, built like a door, and easy in the way that only extremely dangerous men are easy, watched his boss square a green notebook against the table edge, twice, and grinned. "One day that pencil breaks, ma'am, and this whole element goes down with it." Lieutenant Commander Josephine Calder, 35, did not look up from the chart. Then don't be here that day. 11 people laughed in a room that could hold the sound safely. At the door, going out into the dark, Quaid tapped the frame twice, the way he always did, and said the thing he always said. 2 words, half a joke and half a benediction. Good watch. She answered it the way she always answered it. Good watch. The element was 8 people that year, and it ran on the arithmetic of small units. Every member cross-trained on 2 other jobs, every plan built with 1 failure already spent, every name known to perhaps 30 human beings on the entire planet, most of whom wore stars or answered phones in rooms without windows. They had a coffee mug rule. No unit insignia, no mottos, nothing printed, nothing anyone could photograph in a port cafe and turn into a thread to pull. And their idea of a joke was Quaid presenting the boss, on the anniversary of her selection, with a mug that was completely, perfectly blank. She still had it. It was the only thing on her desk in an office that did not officially exist, and it held pencils. Back aboard the Chandler Point, in the year the story lives in, Lieutenant Grant Mosier sat at his terminal in the admin office at 2100 and pulled up the muster file because his department head, a commander with a dry voice, had looked at the morning report and said, with the door open and 2 yeomen listening, "Your roster's got a hole in it, Grant. Ghosts are bad gouge. Clean it up." A hole. His roster. His name on a document with a blank in it, 4 days before an exercise with an admiral staff embarked. The record for FSE-1 was 9 fields long. 8 of them were empty. The 9th said, "Pax," or transient, special category, and offered him nothing to fix and no one to fix it with. And the cursor sat in the empty name field, blinking with the patience of machinery, while a 29-year-old officer decided, in the privacy of his own ambition, that the blank was either somebody's mistake or somebody's lie. Either way, he was going to fill it. By the 3rd morning, the name had gone ship-wide, because a ship is a small town, wrapped in steel, and nothing travels faster, aboard one than a joke with a rank on it. Seaman Nobody. It got said in the chow line while trays slid past the hot bar at a rate of 6 sailors a minute. It got said on the mess decks over red bug juice. It got said by a 3rd class with a mouth on him, loudly, 4 feet behind her, to test whether she would turn around. She did not turn around. On the 4th morning, a strip of masking tape appeared over her rack, block letters in black marker. Nobody. She looked at it for exactly as long as it takes to read 6 letters, left it where it was, and squared away her rack beneath it. In the green notebook, date, time, item. The pencil did not press hard. The page was getting full anyway. The idle writer list gave her the jobs the ship gives to people it has decided are furniture. Trash detail, aft. Wipe down, ladder wells. Frames 70 through 90. Stores working party. 4 hours. 612 boxes by hand. She did each one completely, at an even pace, without being told twice about anything. And this bothered the mess decks more than complaining would have, because complaining is a language sailors understand, and silence is not. The stolen valor theory started at a table of 2nd classes on the aft mess deck on day 4. The way those theories start, one sailor who had seen her correct the vertrep rigging, one who had heard the special category line from a yeoman with loose habits, and one who put the 2 together and decided she was some washout playing operator, some contractor's cousin writing a fake code, somebody pretending to be somebody, which, said the table, explained everything, because real somebodies have names. By supper, the theory had grown the way sea stories grow, sideways and in the retelling. She had washed out of the pipeline, one version went, and rode ships doing make work on some contractor's sympathy billet. She had been somebody's aide and gotten crossways with an admiral. A seaman from Deck Division swore his cousin at the Personnel Support Detachment ashore had looked her up and found nothing, which was true in the way that proved the opposite of what he thought it proved, though no one at the table was equipped to see it. The one fact everyone agreed on was the one that offended them most. She would not defend herself. Accused, in her hearing, of being a fraud, the woman had refilled her coffee, 1 cup, black, and walked her tray to the scullery window and rinsed it and left. On a ship, where every insult is supposed to buy an answer, the refusal to transact read as guilt. It was actually discipline of a kind none of them had ever been asked to hold, but that education was still 4 days out. Tally Broussard sat at the end of that table and said nothing. She had laughed on the first morning, and it had been sitting wrong on her ever since, the way a line you cross without noticing sits wrong on you once you finally notice. She watched the woman clear tables at the end of the trash detail, a rider doing work 2 pay grades below anyone's dignity, and she watched her do it precisely, wasting no motion. And Broussard thought, without wanting the thought, that is not what pretending looks like. Pretending is loud. This was the opposite of loud. Senior Chief Yeoman Harlan Boyce entered the story on the 4th afternoon, 47 years old, 28 in, a man whose entire career was built on the radical idea that paperwork is a form of respect. He heard a second class run the nickname out loud in the admin passageway and stopped him with one flat hand and a voice that had never once needed volume. You muster what the roster gives you. The roster gives you a code. Knock it off. The second class knocked it off. Boyce went back to his files. He had no theory about the woman. Theories were not his job. That night she stood in the rider berthing wash place, alone at the end of the cleaning detail, and looked at her own hands for a moment under the fluorescent hum, steady, unmarked, anonymous, exactly as required. And if the ship had asked her, in that moment, whether the silence cost anything, she would have said what she always said, 1 word, present, and the ship would have learned exactly nothing. The tape stayed over her rack. The pencil stayed sharp. 10 years of this. She was very good at it, and being very good at it was the loneliest skill in the United States Navy. If the sound of a whole deck laughing at a woman whose name they were never allowed to know sits wrong with you, subscribe to Honor Tales, because the rest of this story is why that line on the muster sheet was blank and what it cost to keep it that way. Lieutenant Grant Mosier did not think of what he did next as a campaign, because ambitious men rarely name the thing correctly while they are doing it. He thought of it as diligence. On the morning of Day 5, he flagged FSE-1 to the ship's security officer as an unverifiable embarked rider, citing paragraph and subparagraph, and requested her access badge be suspended pending identity confirmation. The request was procedurally clean. That was the poison in it. It looked exactly like a man doing his job. The badge went amber at 0900. She discovered it at a hangar bay scanner, holding a box of exercise comms gear she was no longer authorized to carry into a space she was no longer authorized to enter, in front of 11 sailors who were. The petty officer at the scanner shrugged with genuine apology. She set the box down, squared it against the hatch, combing, and walked away without one word. And in the green notebook, later, date, time, item. Berthing followed by noon, reassigned aft to a 6-rack space above the shaft alley, where the deck hums at 104 decibels little brother all night long. Struck from the exercise spaces by 1400. Added, by close of business, to a memo Mosier wrote for his department head, titled, without irony, Roster Hygiene. The commander skimmed it, said, fine, and went back to his inbox, which is how most institutional cruelty gets its second signature. Tally Broussard was on the working party that moved the rider's gear aft, 3 sailors, and a hand truck for 1 sea bag, and 1 small green notebook that the woman carried herself. The new berthing space above the shaft alley had 6 racks, 5 of them empty. paint sweating in the heat off the deck, and the hum coming up through the frames like something large turning over in its sleep. Broussard watched the woman survey the compartment for exactly 2 seconds, select the rack that put her back to the bulkhead and her eyes on the hatch, and begin making it up with the corners squared, and something in the ordering of those priorities. Sight lines first, comfort never, moved a piece of furniture in Broussard's understanding of the world. On the way forward, she said, to nobody in particular, "That lady's been somewhere." The second class pushing the hand truck told her to secure the chatter. She secured it. But the piece of furniture stayed where it had moved. Senior Chief Boyce got the verification tasking because verification was his shop, and he ran it the way he ran everything, in order, without adjectives. Fleet personnel query. No record returnable. Transient accounting system. Category header only. He climbed the ladder of systems one rung at a time for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and at the top of it, his screen returned a frame he had seen exactly twice in 28 years. Record sealed. Access insufficient. Refer to issuing authority. The issuing authority was a fleet-level code that made his eyebrows do something small. 28 years produces a private museum of paperwork, and Harlan Boyce walked his for a moment before he moved. The first sealed record he had ever hit was in 2009, a transient rider on a destroyer out of Bahrain, and the chief who ran his shop then had given him the only counsel that ever mattered on the subject. The seal is the answer. It is not a locked door you are supposed to pick. It is a sign that says the door is load-bearing. The second was in 2019, and the officer who had pushed on that one, politely, curiously, just to see, had been retired within the year for reasons no message traffic ever explained. Boyce had initialed both encounters, filed both, and slept well both nights, because the system he served was imperfect in 1,000 ways he could name alphabetically, but it did not seal records to amuse itself. He printed nothing. He wrote a memo of exactly 4 lines and carried it to Mosier in person. Record exists, sir. It's sealed above me, above you, and above this ship. That's not a hole in your roster. That's a fence. Mosier, whose roster was clean, or was not, whose department head's dry voice was still living rent-free under his sternum, asked what a man was supposed to do with a fence. Boyce looked at him for a moment, with something that in a less patient man would have been pity. Files sealed like that seal themselves for a reason, sir. Log it, leave it alone, and take the tape off her rack. Your division's fingerprints are on this ship's manners. Mosier logged it. He did not leave it alone. In the other year, the manifest finished its short, catastrophic life. It went out over an unclassified shore circuit at 1612 local because a liaison officer wanted a head count for berthing, and nobody upstream had marked the attachment. It listed 8 names. It sat on 4 servers no one controlled. And 9 days later, in a port city that will not be named here, a van that should not have known which corner to wait on waited on the correct corner, and the ambush that followed lasted 51 seconds. 3 of the 8 did not come home walking. They came home the other way, under flags, at Dover, at 0 dark, with an honor detail and no press, because even their funerals were categorized. Chief Silas Quaid was the second of the 3. The pencil in Josephine Calder's breast pocket that night at Dover was his joke, and now it is her ritual. And this is the part of the story where the audience gets to know what the flight deck does not. Her name. Josephine Calder, then a lieutenant commander, now a captain, United States Navy, commanding officer of the Maritime Special Activities Task Unit. The whole exercise was quietly built around. The directive came down 11 weeks after the funerals, 4 paragraphs, fleet level, still in force. Personnel of the affected element shall appear on all rosters, manifests, and musters, by billet code only. No names. Not on paper, not on a screen, not out loud. A name on a list had killed 3 of her people. The Navy's answer was to make her nameless, everywhere, forever. And she had signed the concurrence line herself, pressing exactly as hard as the pencil allowed and no harder. So when a lieutenant with a clean roster and a dirty conscience stared at the blank 9th field on his terminal, the audience now knew precisely what belonged in it, and precisely why the emptiness was not an error, but a headstone. Wallace Farrow found her on the fantail at sunset on day 5, which was not an accident, because Command Master Chiefs do not have accidents. She was watching the wake the way engineers watch gauges. He stood beside her at a respectful angle and asked, in the fleet's oldest dialect, a question that was not a question. Following seas tonight, what would you give the helmsman? 2 degrees weather helm. Ease it in the trough. 7 syllables where a rider should have had none. The answer was not just right. It was watch team right. It was 10,000 hours right. Farrow nodded slowly at the ocean, as though it had spoken. He had already collected the rest, boots silent on ladder wells because her weight never left the balls of her feet, the watch face turned in, coveralls sterile as an operating room, the muster interval kept to the inch, and present always 1 beat early, the habit of someone for whom roll call had once been a count of the living. He said nothing to her. He said something to Mosier the next morning, off the record, in the passageway outside the wardroom, quiet as a bilge. Lieutenant, I've been in this Navy 31 years, and I've met 2 people who muster by code. Both times, everyone who made their lives harder regretted it, not because anybody punished them, because of what it turned out they'd done, and who they'd done it to. If she is who I think she is, the only smart move you have left is to walk away. Mosier heard him, understand that. He heard every word, and the words arrived in a mind where the commander's dry voice had already rented the last available room. Fraud was on his mess decks, with his name attached to the roster it lived on. If she was real, he was finished being right. If she was fake, he was a hero with a paper trail. A frightened, ambitious man can convert any warning into fuel, and Grant Mosier was, by the 6th morning, running entirely on it. He built his case that evening, the way anxious men build cases, alone at his terminal. With the office dark around the screen glow, assembling a folder he had privately titled Due Diligence. The badge suspension, procedurally clean. The verification memo, 4 lines, sealed record, which he read now, not as offense, but as a confirmation that something was being hidden, because a man who needs the world to be a certain shape will read every sign as an arrow pointing at it. He rehearsed the vindication scene in the shower and in the rack, the department head's dry voice going warm, the admiral's staff hearing how a sharp lieutenant had caught what an entire personnel system missed. It did not once occur to him, this is the true and ordinary tragedy of the type, that every officer above him already had access to a piece of the picture he lacked, and that all of them were leaving the line blank on purpose. He was the only man on the ship trying to fill it, and he mistook that for being the only man awake. At 11:40 that day, he requested the custody transfer log for the ship's classified materials safe. If you want to know what a man finds when he opens an envelope, the entire United States Navy sealed on purpose, and what it costs him, subscribe to Honor Tales, because this story does not go where he thinks it goes. Rider berthing, Day 6, 22:30. Red light. The shaft alley hummed below her rack like a patient animal, and Josephine Calder sat with the green notebook unopened on her knee, and for the only time in this story, the story goes inside. She was thinking about lists. She had spent 10 years learning the exact weight of a name. 2003. an ensign with her surname stenciled on everything she owned, proud of the ink. 2010. A lieutenant walking into a program whose selection letter she had been required to burn, learning that some jobs are done by people who agree to stop existing in exchange for being allowed to matter. 2015. The night that made the legend she was never permitted to wear. A landing force element stranded on a lee shore in weather the helicopters wouldn't fly. 42 men and women of an amphib's blue-green team pinned between surf and rock, and her element going in by boat. 4 trips, 6 hours, sea state 5, until the count on the beach read 0 and the count in the well deck read 42. She remembered the executive officer of that amphib standing on the bridge wing as her boats came home the last time, a lieutenant commander named Lachlan, gripping the rail, wanting to come down and shake hands. He was never told her name, never given the chance, and 11 years later, 4 decks above where she now sat, that same man commanded this ship. She had seen his name on the quarterdeck placard the day she embarked, filed it, said nothing. It changed nothing. It was simply the Navy being what the Navy is, a small town the size of an ocean. And 2016, the manifest. 51 seconds. The 3 funerals she attended standing in the back row in a plain black coat like a stranger. She, their commanding officer, unnamed even in grief, because the directive was already in draft, and even her mourning was classified. Quade's wife had looked straight through her at the graveside, not knowing. That was the price of the fence. You do not get to be known even by the people whose lives your name destroyed. Dover had been raining, fine and steady, the way it seems to know to do. She had stood under the eaves of the transfer facility at 0300, while the honor detail carried 3 cases down the ramp at the regulation pace of 90 steps per minute. And she had held her salute for the length of all 3, alone, in civilian clothes, in the dark, where no one could see it, and no one could ask who she was to render it. The pencil had been in her coat pocket that night, taken from Quade's kit before it shipped home, with the permission of exactly no one, and the blessing, she chose to believe, of the only man whose opinion on the subject counted. It was a carpenter's pencil, flat, so it would not roll off a chart table on a moving boat. Practical to the end. She had sharpened it with a knife for 10 years and used it for one notebook after another, and never once written a name with it, because the pencil, like her, was no longer allowed to say the things it knew. The citation for 2015 lived in a folder inside a safe, inside a room, with the blinds drawn. It had been read aloud once, to an audience of 4, by an admiral, who then locked it back up. A ribbon lowered from above by 2 hands. No photographs. She had been decorated the way other people are erased. On the rack shelf, the pencil. Quade at the doorframe, 2 taps. Good watch. 10 years of answering that in her head at lights out because there was no one left to say it to. The ship's exercise message traffic ran through her mind's inventory, the way it ran through the actual system 4 decks up. In 72 hours, the operational annex would require activation authority from FSE-1. Her release, her authentication, nothing moving until the nameless line on the muster sheet said proceed. Mosier's amber badge had already stalled 2 preparation steps. The ship's clock was now running against the lieutenant, and he did not know it. And she was not going to tell him, because the fence exists whether or not the man climbing it believes in fences. She sharpened the pencil 3 turns, squared the notebook, and turned off the light. She had done this before. That was the saddest sentence in her file, and it appeared nowhere in it. The classified materials vault of the Chandler Point is a room the size of a walk-in closet, with a door that weighs more than a car, and at 13:20 on day 7, Lieutenant Grant Mosier signed the custody log with a pretext, exercise document inventory, quarterly reconciliation, plausible words in a plausible order, and drew from the third drawer a sealed personnel supplement, gray envelope, red border, a fleet-level control number, and stamped instructions that were not ambiguous. To be opened only by issuing authority or commanding officer. He told himself he wasn't opening it. He was documenting it. He set it on the desk under the vault light, took out his phone, which was itself a violation the size of the room, and photographed the cover sheet twice and the control number once, close up, so the serial read clean. Senior Chief Boyce came through the vault door mid-frame, a routine he had kept every day for 11 years, and stopped. He did not shout. Shouting wasn't procedure. He looked at the envelope, at the phone, at the lieutenant, for a period of time that Mosier would later measure in geological ages, and then he looked at the custody log and read the pretext written there in the lieutenant's own hand. "Sir," he said evenly, "log your time out." That was all. Mosier logged out at 13:29 with the sensation of a man who has just heard ice crack and is standing very far from shore. What Boyce did next, he did because both things were true and both things were his. At 1800 he filed a classified material incident report, in writing, naming the time, the envelope, the phone, and the officer, and routing it, as the instruction required, directly to the commanding officer. A yeoman does not choose between loyalty and procedure. Procedure is the loyalty. Josephine Calder passed the open admin office door at 1600, carrying a swab bucket she was still assigned by a list a frightened man had put her on, and saw the gray envelope with the red border lying on the desk where it should never have been. Out. In the air. In the light. She stopped for 1 second. Anyone watching would have seen a rider glance at office clutter. What actually happened was a commanding officer reading the whole battle in one frame. The pulled envelope, the pretext. The fence climbed at last, and understanding that the trap she had refused to set had built itself, and all she had ever had to do was stand at muster and answer to a code and let a small man run out of rope in his own handwriting. For the first time in the story, she smiled. It was not a large smile. Broussard, coming the other way with the mail, saw it and stopped walking, because on that particular face, the smile looked like the tide changing. The incident report reached Captain Theodore Laughlin's cabin at 2150. The light stayed on until 3. At 0400, the captain called the command master chief, and Pharaoh, who answered on the first ring, the way 31-year men do, listened for 2 minutes and said only, "Recommend you take it yourself, sir, at muster." A pause. "Yes?" said Laughlin. That's what she'd choose if anyone were allowed to ask her. 0628, Day 8. The flight deck of the Chandler Point held 193 sailors in ranks, with the sun coming up red out of a flat sea. And at 0630 exactly, the hatch opened, and the commanding officer of the ship walked out to take morning muster himself. Understand what that means aboard a warship. Captains do not take muster. Captains have not taken muster since the age of sail. 193 spines found 2 additional inches apiece, and Lieutenant Grant Mosier, standing before his division with his phone locked in an evidence bag 4 decks below, felt the deck move under him in dead calm seas. Laughlin read the roll himself, plainly, without theater, name after name in column order, and the deck answered him crisply because the deck had never once been asked to answer its captain. And then he reached the line. He stopped. He lowered the board. He looked at 193 of his sailors for a long moment, and the ship's wake hissed astern, and somewhere below a pump kicked on, and that was the only sound. 4 days ago, the captain said, This deck laughed at a line with no name on it. So this morning, I am going to tell you why that line has no name. Because the not knowing has been paid for, and you are standing inside somebody else's bill. In 2016, a list of 8 names that should never have been printed went out over an unclassified circuit because somewhere, someone found a blank line inconvenient. 9 days later, in a port I am not going to name, that list stopped being paper. 51 seconds. 3 of the 8 came home under flags. I am not permitted to say their names either. There is a directive, 4 paragraphs still in force, written in their memory, and what it says is that certain people in this Navy will appear on every roster, every manifest, and every muster sheet in the fleet as a code and nothing else. Not because they are nobody, because a name, in the wrong tray, at the wrong hour, is ordnance. He let the silence carry for 3 full seconds. The code on my muster sheet is FSE-1. It is carried, in the entire United States Navy, by exactly 1 human being. 11 years ago, I was the executive officer of an amphibious ship with 42 of my sailors and Marines stranded under a lee shore in weather the aircraft could not fly. Somebody's element came through that surf 4 times in 6 hours and handed all 42 of them back. I stood on a bridge wing and watched, and I was never told a single name, and I have spent 11 years wanting to say thank you correctly. He looked, once, directly at position 3 of the rider rank. You have been standing muster beside her for 8 days. No order was given. That must be said precisely, because this channel has shown you 100 formations, and this was not one of them. No one called attention. No one saluted. Nothing in the book was invoked. 193 backs simply straightened, one after another, front to back, the way the laugh had traveled on the first morning, and exactly along the same path, as though the deck were paying back a debt in the currency it had borrowed. Tally Broussard straightened with the rest of them and found that her eyes were stinging, which embarrassed her, and then she decided to let it, which was the moment she started becoming the sailor she would eventually be. 3 ranks over, Command Master Chief Farrow stood with the muster board against his chest and permitted himself, at last, the small nod of a man confirming a bearing he had taken days ago. Senior Chief Boyce, at the admin station, looked at the blank line on his own copy of the roll, the line he had defended without ever once knowing what it held, and understood that he had spent 28 years being exactly right about why paperwork mattered, and that this morning was the receipt. Grant Mosier's face did what faces do when the floor of a career gives way in real time. Confusion first, the arithmetic refusing to start. Then disbelief, the numbers running anyway. Then recognition, which is the cruelest of the 4, because recognition has receipts. The sealed record, the fence, the senior chief's flat warning, the master chief's quiet one, the envelope, the phone, the photographs, of a protected identity, his thumbprint on every frame. Then horror, complete and physical, as the captain read the roll's last line himself into a silence you could have stood a watch by. FSE-1. Present, said Josephine Calder, 1 beat early, the way she had answered a count of the living all her life. The reckoning aboard the Chandler Point took 19 hours and required no handcuffs. And if you have watched this channel long enough to expect a brig scene, watch what actually happens instead, because it is worse and it is better. Nobody arrested Grant Mosier. Nobody flew him off in irons before an IG task force. The Navy did to him a thing prouder and colder. It processed him. The classified material incident went forward as written by the man whose job was to write it. His security clearance was suspended for cause for the balance of the deployment, which for an admin officer is a professional amputation. He came off the watch bill. and the remediation plan, drafted, with impeccable procedure and no visible expression, by the ship's training department, ordered him to requalify in classified material handling from the first page of the manual, under the supervision of the embarked fleet support element. Her element. Her people. Every module signed off by operators who mustered as codes, whose names he had tried to harvest with a phone. He reported to their compartment for instruction at 0800 the next morning, and a first class with no name tape handed him Volume 1, and pulled out a chair, and was courteous to him, and the courtesy was the punishment. He would live and work every day for 7 months under the authority of the woman he had named Seaman Nobody, and she would never once mention it, and that would be the whole sentence, served in full, in silence. His first session lasted 4 hours. The first class walked him through control numbers, custody logs, and the exact clause his pretext had violated, patiently, the way you teach a seaman recruit. And at the end of it, she slid the sign-off sheet across the table and said the only sentence anyone in the element ever said to him that acknowledged the situation at all. Everything in this book, sir, exists because somebody paid for it. He signed. He kept signing, module after module, week after week. And somewhere around the 4th week, he stopped rehearsing explanations in the shower. And somewhere around the 7th, he started actually reading the book. And that is as much redemption as this story owes him. Not forgiveness, just the slow conversion of a careless man into a careful one, conducted by people whose names he would never learn. At officer's call that same morning, Captain Lachlan did one more thing captains rarely do. He named a name on purpose. "Senior Chief Yeoman Harlan Boyce," he said, in front of the wardroom and the chief's mess. Verified what he could verify, protected what he could not, warned who he could warn, and reported what he saw. Up, in writing, on time, against his own chain's comfort. That is what right looks like when it's inconvenient. I want it said out loud, because aboard this ship, we say the names we're allowed to say. 28 years, and Harlan Boyce, who had never once needed volume, discovered he needed a second to answer. The inversion was complete, and nobody had designed it, which is how the best ones happen. Her name protected by honor, his honored by name. If a story about a woman who let a system work, who never raised her voice, never pulled her rank, never needed the room to know, does something for you that 100 shouting matches never did, subscribe to Honor Tales, because these are the stories the loud world doesn't tell. Tally Broussard put in a chit that afternoon to be assigned to the Fleet Support Element's working party for the remainder of the exercise, hull maintenance, comms runs, anything. Boyce processed it himself and initialed the corner and added, in the remarks block, 6 words in a yeoman's exact hand. Recommend Sar Broussard, Yeoman Striker. She stood the dawn rail the next morning with the working party, 4 feet from the woman she had laughed at, and did not say sorry, because she had figured out on her own that the apology would be for her, not for the woman, and instead she held the line taut and squared the corners on every task. All morning, and one time, the woman looked over at her work and gave a single nod, and Broussard carried that nod around for the rest of her 26-year career, which is a different story, and a good one. The helicopter came in at first light on day 10, gray, no markings worth reading, and settled on spot 5 with the sun still under the horizon's rim. Josephine Calder walked to it the way she had walked everywhere aboard. 2 fingers on the rails, no sound on the ladder wells, carrying 1 sea bag and a green pocket notebook with 9 days of dates and times and items and not 1 adjective. No quarters were called. No one lined the rail on any order. But the after lookout would say, and keep saying for years, that an unusual number of sailors found reasons to be topside at 0540 that morning, spread along the deck edge in ones and twos, coffee steaming, watching a rider with no name tape lift off their ship, and that every one of them stood a little straighter than the hour required. At 0630, morning muster, aft flight deck. A chief read the roll because the world had resumed its correct shape. He came to the line and read it as written, FSE 1. No name listed. No one laughed. 193 sailors stood in a silence that had learned something, and the chief marked the line, detached, 0540, and moved on, and the sun came up ordinary and gold over a deck full of straight backs. Senior Chief Boyce collected the muster sheets at 0650, as he had every morning for 11 years. On the flight deck sheet, beside the nameless line, in pencil, in a hand so precise it could have been machined, someone had written 2 words during the night, and he read them, and looked out at the empty gray sky where the helicopter had gone. And then he filed the sheet exactly as procedure required, because procedure is the loyalty, and some thanks are classified too. Good watch. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.